All right, guys, 3.3, population ecology. Remember to ask 2 questions at the end of this video so that way we have stuff to discuss tomorrow. Okay? So talking about population ecology is talking about, population size, density, growth, all the kind of things that go involved in it. Okay? So we're starting at page 61. You can see there at the bottom right-hand corner, page 61. Okay, talking about population density. All this is people or organisms per square meter or square kilometer or something like that. Okay, the formula to figure out density is really easy. Is take the population size, divide it by the area, and there's your density. So when they talk about the population is the densest in the world, is typically they're using people per square meter is what they're using. Okay, now there are population distributions. There's 3 different basic types. There's random, there's uniform, and there's clumped. So the first one is typically, think of it as like a forest. Okay, the trees are just kind of randomly put around wherever there happens to be good sun, wherever there happens to be good soil, where there happens to be good enough room, and so on. Okay, the next you can see are the penguins. Penguins are a really good example of a uniform space because basically they don't want anybody coming close to their egg. So they kind of keep everybody at a certain distance away from each other. Okay, typically predators actually do this as well. Like wolverines, will hunt kind of almost, you have your section, I have my section, and so on. So they basically space themselves out pretty good. Okay, there's also clumped distribution. Easy example is this basically the oasis inside of a desert. They're basically going to clump up where there's water or where there's one of the limiting nutrients. Where they find it, that's where they're going to grow. Okay, so that's a clumped distribution. Next page is talking about bird population changing. Now, since we're talking about population ecology, this is actually a really good, real world example of how population ecology and population is changing over time. So it's kind of an interesting read. All right, page 64. Okay, so first off, the sex ratio. Okay, 1-to-1 is best. Because basically for every 1 male, there's 1 female. So basically kind of everybody has the most or the highest opportunity to basically give their DNA and give their genes to the next generation. So 1-to-1 is best. Okay, the next age structure diagram, you can see I haven't really written anything down there, but basically the format, you got the old people on the top, you got the younger people on the bottom, males on the left, females on the right. Okay, and I didn't want to fill this in because I didn't want to kind of get myself stuck in a certain diagram. But if there's a whole bunch of people that are young and not very many that are old, that population is about to go through a boom because that younger demographic is about to get into reproductive age, and so they're about to have a whole bunch of kids. Okay, and we saw a couple of these different age structure diagrams in the video, so I'm not going to go into these details too much. Okay, now population growth and shrinking and remaining stable and so on, I wrote population change equations, know them. What I'm referring to is down here. Okay, this is the one basically right here that's the most important. Okay, birth rate minus the death rate, which you can see up there, that's called the rate of natural increase. But a population doesn't only have birth and death rates, they also have the immigration, or people coming in to their population, emigration, organisms leaving the population. So you've got to combine the birth rate minus the death rate, plus the immigration rate minus the emigration rate, that gives you the population growth rate. Okay, and it's basically a plug and play for numbers is what it is. Okay, so make sure you know how to do them because they're going to basically give you guys that kind of stuff for you guys to do potentially on the AP test. I had a couple kids last year who had this on the AP test. Okay, so this graph right there is the exponential growth graph. We're going to talk about that in just a couple quick seconds. I wanted to kind of give you a preview of it real fast. Okay, so that exponential growth curve is also called a J-shaped graph, which I assume you guys learned in biology. This is the exponential growth. Okay, and as you can see, basically J-shaped graph, the population starts low, and then just absolutely skyrockets. Okay, same thing happened with humans. Okay, now there's also an S-shaped graph. That's where they've reached their carrying capacity. Okay, so this pick graph would be this one right here. Okay, so you can tell in the beginning of this exponential growth, this is basically right here down. This is basically the J shape right there. The S shape is basically they've come up here and they've reached their carrying capacity. Now this graph is nice because it basically shows that they came to this point and just basically leveled off, and that's all they did. In reality, populations will go up and then they'll go down, and then they'll go up and then they'll go down, back and forth, back and forth. So the carrying capacity is kind of like the average of that over the years. Okay. Definition I wrote for carrying capacity, you can see max size of population can be in that environment. Typically, food is the limiting factor for this stuff, is what it is. Okay. All right. Next page, going to page 66. Now we're talking about density dependent versus density independent factors. Okay, so basically I have density dependent and density independent is what that stuff is. Okay, so for density dependent, competition. So if the density is higher, there will be more competition. So it's dependent on the density factor. Okay, disease is the same thing. Like honestly, think of COVID right now. Initially, the big spreads of COVID here in the United States was in New York City, here in Washington a little bit, but then in New York City, where the population is very dense. So disease can spread if everybody's like packed into someplace really slow or really tightly. Okay, space, same thing. You know, if I go to like North Dakota, there's not very many people, but if I go down to like Miami, the space is much more limited, and that's density dependent. Okay, now density independent, okay, that's climate, meaning that the climate's going to be this way no matter what. You know, kind of a thing. Like, well, obviously, we got climate change going on right now, but the climate in a specific area is going to be that way whether there are organisms there or not, typically. I wrote Mother Nature here, so think of like hurricanes and tornadoes and volcanoes and earthquakes and stuff like that. You know, the volcano like Mount St. Helens didn't erupt because it was mad that people were moving close to it. Like it just erupted anyway. Okay, tides are the same thing. Okay, the tides are going to go no matter if there's somebody in LA or not. Like the moon is moving a lot of that kind of stuff. Okay, so now we got K selected and R selected species. Okay, K selected species. The way that I talk about K selected species to my biology kids is that K selected, they basically kind of an easy way to think about it. They're typically the bigger animals. So you can see I got humans, elephants, apes, higher up mammals. They typically have few kids because they care for them a lot. You know, like humans, we spend a lot of time and energy on their kids. Elephants, they're pregnant for 21 months and then they care for them a ton. Same thing with apes. They're pregnant for about the same as humans, but they spend a lot of time with them. You know, bears, it's the same thing. You know, lions, the same thing. The higher up mammals. Few kids, lots of care for their young as well. Our selected species, okay, these guys are typically the smaller organism, okay? You can include insects in there, okay? So you got invertebrates, you got octopus, seahorse, salmon, you know, think of like beetles and mosquitoes and bees, stuff like that. I wrote good luck because all they do is lay eggs and head on out of there. They lay eggs. I hope you survive. Good luck is basically the main difference here. So lots of kids, but very, very, very little care for their young. Okay? One of the things I skipped over, I'm sorry, is this what's called the survivorship curve. Okay? These are typically the R selected species. Okay? You can see the age. Typically, R selected species don't really go too far. Okay? But few survivors are enough. You know, like a mosquito will lay hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of eggs. So if only a couple of them survive, they'll be okay. Okay? Then there's a type 2 graph where it's just basically kind of some of them live, some of them survive. It's kind of an even stretch along the way. Whereas the higher up mammals, a lot of them live to old age. Okay, again, we put a lot of care into our young and kind of caring for each other. That's a type 1 curve. Okay? Make sure you put some questions in the video so we have stuff to talk about tomorrow.